They didn't quite throw us out of their office. They never said they were going to help us. They tolerated us at best. So the next year we said, okay, we got to do something different. And so I started at that point, I'm going to go talk to like local legislators before session and start to develop a relationship. And I came across Mark Pafford, and he had Melissa Williams in his office, which was his LA. And she was very, very helpful to me, and she educated me quite a bit as to how the process worked. And I said, we're going to write a bill. So we did. We wrote this bill, and Mark put it in and had it, put into bill format for us and everything. And now we have something to talk about when we go. But I also went first few times, and I talked about this bill, and I talked about the things that we needed to change. My approach was very much, here's what you need to fix to help me. What I quickly learned is they weren't going to help me. They couldn't care less. Didn't matter what my bill said. Nobody was going to sponsor it, yada, yada. What I learned most importantly was that when you speak to legislators, you have to get to a place where you understand and can find a common ground to partner with them. And what I have found is that the common place for us to partner is public safety. And as long as I couch my message with the ultimate goal, which is public safety involves everything from prevention to safe reentry of people back into the community, and for the population that we're all here supporting to have an end date on their punishment. And that truly is in the best interest of public safety. So I have made it my business to educate myself on the research, familiarize myself with the researchers, and to understand the application of best practices. With that, I now go to Tallahassee and I have conversations with my legislators, and very often I am considered a resource. So I will get a phone call. Hey, I heard about, did you know, I just put your information over to this particular agency. We're having a problem placing people. And I developed relationships not just with the legislature, but with the agencies that they legislate. And it has been effective. What I learned most recently in this last session, and I'll put it in the form of a story, is that partnerships are very, very important. There were several bills, 3 specifically that concerned of 2 most concerning. One was lifetime GPS monitoring of all offenders. So if you were convicted forward of October of 2015, I think is when it would go into effect, you would be put on GPS monitoring for the rest of your life, regardless of what the sex offense was, and you would have to pay for it. But if you didn't pay up, it's a 3rd-degree felony, and they're going to put you back in prison. And the other one was actually a good bill that we were instrumental in assisting to write, which was risk assessment to determine, the real risk that somebody is going to pose that can be used for pre-sentencing and so on and so forth to give to the courts, and maybe even having access to a diversion program. That's a whole other area. Anyway, but Senator Gibson went ahead and added language to that to change the mandatory curfew for those on community control or probation from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So it went from being 8 hours to 12 hours. And there were just so many things wrong with that. I don't even want to elaborate. But in any event, what we did is we spoke to the legislators about it. I went in and pled my case every time. But I partnered with the Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, the Florida Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I partnered with the Catholic Conference of Bishops. I partnered with another group called the Bridges, which is a treatment program, and we just talked about the common problems that we all had with these bills. So in concert, separately, we were sending the same message to the legislators as we went to visit them about a host of different issues. And so we learned I've learned that, to pay attention to other bills that are out there that may be important to some of the same organizations that might have interest in some of the bills that we're not supporting, so that I could be present. I could offer my opinion in passing when I speak to a legislator. Oh, by the way, you know, the bill that so-and-so is bringing forward about such and such an issue, that's really a good piece of legislation, and you guys ought to consider that. On the same token, you know, we're talking about this piece of legislation, which is not so good, and here's why. So it changes the conversation, and it helps us to align with organizations that have a little bit lighter lift of what they're trying to accomplish, and therefore may have more credibility in discussing this issue. And so we were able to keep these bills from even being heard in committee. So this year, I was very fortunate. I didn't have to testify against anything because I learned how to kind of work a little bit more in a more sophisticated way.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Again, my name is Josh Gravens, and I'm here from Texas. I just wanted to ask a question before I go into. How many folks here have actually met with your own legislator? Oh, that's a good number. And how many folks have gone to your state house or capitol and have gone, oh wow, this is a fantastic number. So maybe we should be listening to the story. I think so. To be fair, like all of the work that I've been able to do legislatively would not be possible if Mary Sue in Texas had not laid a foundation, such a strong foundation. She's known in the Capitol. People know who she is and what she stands for. And so when I got into legislative advocacy, I took a different approach. And so obviously, for those of you who don't know my backstory, but I was placed on the registry as a kid. And so I decided that I was going to work on policies outside of registration issues, policies that didn't necessarily affect people that were on the registry. And what I found was that by building personal relationships, as Gail mentioned, with legislators on issues that most people can get around, I was able to have a much better impact with legislators because we got to know them, they got to know me. All of a sudden they hear my backstory, and they hear a backstory of people that worked with me on different bills, and that opened the doors that I don't think would have been open otherwise. And that's not to say, oh my gosh, you should be working on, Save Pets. That's not exactly what I'm saying, but what one of the fundamental beliefs that I hold is that registration and sex offender policy is a symptom of a much bigger issue, which is mass incarceration and our dependence on a criminal justice system to carry out vengeance. And so also, kind of to touch on what Gail said, to understand, hey, this is a criminal justice issue, you look at what agencies or what organizations in states are actually working on criminal justice issues. And what a lot of you know is most of those organizations will not touch sex offender policy. That's just the reality. But I think this session in Texas, we actually had quite a few organizations that actually did step out, including some children's advocacy centers that actually did support legislation because and really what kind of set the stage for this is we had a coalition of organizations that came together. So in Texas we have a part-time legislature. Does Florida have a part-time legislature? We have every other odd year, which is a really bizarre way to govern, but hey, this is Texas and we don't like government. This all started in kind of the off year, and this is definitely something going forward. I learned a lot this session. But going forward, if you're showing up when the bills are going on, you are about 6 months to a year too late because the deals have already been made. And the interesting thing on bills is there's not necessarily... So like when you think about the system of government, you think, oh, a bill goes to a committee, it gets voted on, it goes through. It's a very simple process if you look at it like, oh, this is how a bill becomes a law, right? Because that's what we heard on Schoolhouse Rocks. But the reality is those things are not linear. There's a lot of things that goes into bills. There are deals that other legislators are making. There's obviously stuff that they're getting from their constituents. There's a whole lot of things. So this legislative session, I believe that working with Texas Voices, and I am a member of a separate organization called Texas Cure, but I also do advocacy on behalf of myself and juveniles that are on the registry. I feel like we had a very successful legislative. We didn't get, this year, we didn't get some of our asks, but as far as bad bills, I believe that Texas Voices folks worked very hard to kill all residency restrictions bills, one that was looking at creating a statewide residency restriction that actually created felony penalties for passing through child safety zones. And in reality, what we learned so many legislative tactics, and again, as Gail mentioned, like it is far more important. Your story, unfortunately, when you sit in front of these people and you testify, is not necessarily going to impact them. We want to think, oh my gosh, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk to these people, and we're going to convert them. That's kind of depressing to say, but it's true. What impacts them? If you're meeting them the day that they're voting on something, that doesn't impact them. If you get to know them, and again, I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place, but I want to touch on something that Gail said. That personal connection is vitally important, and one of the things we are talking about going forward is how do you build a personal relationship with the legislator? Well, the question I always ask is how do you build a relationship with anybody else? If you are walking up to somebody and you intend on having a friendship with them, and the first thing that you say is, my son's on the registry, or I'm on the registry, unless you feel like so compulsory, compelled to do that, you're not looking at a very successful relationship. And so to understand legislators, there's a lot of they are a person. I mean, we've got this built-up idea that there's so many things, but they are a person fundamentally. Their staff are people. And so something that I did was I became a person before they found out my backstory. And so, I was working with a lot of legislators, and then I got arrested last year, sometime around the RSOL conference. And all of a sudden, these policymakers who knew me for somebody else were pouring their heart out to me saying, what can we do? How can we help you? And the reason was because I decided, I'm going to become a human before I become a registrant. And so when they found out about it, it was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? This is terrible. And so part of that, we were actually able to get a substantial bill, a personal bill that was very near and dear to me, was actually a bill that looks for successful outcomes for youth who are convicted, or youth who commit sexual offenses. For Texas, it was a substantial bill because to me, I believe it is a conversation that is so vital to occur. And what will happen, and what I think will happen from this, is that we'll actually see in Texas that children will no longer be registered. And so that's a substantial step, I think, for everybody. Because while legislators are being educated, and this is one of the things I like to do, is, children are on the registry. We place children on the registry. It's terrible. Oh, but let me tell you something about adult registrants. They're not the big scary people that you thought either. And so I'm kind of rambling, so I might cut it off. But I want to just echo with Gail really quickly. Relationship is important. You grow close to people by relationship. Legislators are no different. I think one of the biggest things that RSOL helps people to do is to realize that you are a citizen activist. You're a citizen lobbyist. And so it is so important to connect with other people, other criminal justice groups. You don't have to go to work with them on registration. If you're in a state where there's not a whole lot of activity going on, go in with the criminal justice organizations, meet people, work on bills that they're working on, and get to know how the system works and learn to meet the staffers and legislators. And I think you'll find in the long run that you'll be well ahead when it comes to actually being able to oppose bills. We had some wonderful legislators that stepped up that were actually, they tagged bills, which is a way once they're voted out of committee to stall them in scheduling. And so what happened is all the bad bills were held off to the end of the session. And then we had this wonderful thing where there was a gay marriage bill. And so the Republican legislators the Democratic legislators held off, and so all the bills behind the gay marriage bill died. And those were every single bad bill that you could imagine. And so we were able to use legislative tactics to stall. And then once you have these deadlines, they died. And it was fantastic. And that's a large part due to Mary Sue and the folks in Texas Voices. But I was glad it was such a successful legislative session.
Great. All right. Thanks, Josh. By comparison, I think although we have a wonderful attorney and some great stuff going on in Maryland, in terms of some of our legislative stuff, we're probably still a little on the new side by comparison. So some of the stories that I have to tell are more from our first year or two, which was in 2010. We were fighting the Adam Walsh Act, and we lost. And talking to Larry Neely, who you might have seen on one of the earlier panels, he's been my right arm through all of this. I said, but I don't want it. It can't pass. We don't want it to pass. We said, well, it's going to happen because it's a political reality, as they're saying. But we learned an awful lot that year. And one of the first things that we learned, it kind of ties in with what Josh and Gail were saying. We asked the ACLU people, well, how do we fight the bills? So we were there at the end, when the train was way out of the station, it was way down the road, and we were there testifying against the bills. So all of that pre-work, long since done. We'd only just found out about it. We'd only just gotten started as an organization. We didn't have that 6 to 12 months, but we couldn't just sit there and let the train go. So we all showed up to testify, and the ACLU said, "Well, come and tell your stories." Right? We've already heard what happened with Gail. So we came and we told our stories. We told about our loved ones. We told about how they were good people and they deserved a second chance and things that happened. And we only have about 3 minutes in our legislature. We don't have a wide open one. Some people have, you can talk as long as you want. We had to keep it to 3 minutes. We carefully timed those stories, and we got up and told them, and when we were done, everybody said, "You're so brave to come and talk." It did no good. Right? So the first couple of times, that was the best we got. And we said, stories aren't going to do this. And so the next time, we did have some successes, which I'll tell you about, but the stories weren't it. So we pretty quickly shifted, and we started focusing on, amazingly, the bills. And, if there was a story, what we learned was that the story really had to illuminate a problem with the specific bill. And so we had, some instances where we worked on that. Now, one thing that we did have in our favor that first year, there had not been organized anything in opposition. And there'd been bad bills in past years. So when we first started calling, and I was a deer caught in the headlights. Okay, I had no background in lobbying, in showing up at my court, and nothing. I've told people before, my idea of being politically astute was to find a friend who understood the laws and whatever it was, and be told how to vote. Okay, that's my level of political involvement. So here I am down at the trying to lobby. Anyway, what we ended up doing was, did the light just go down?
I think so.
It did. It's the mood. Oh, it's the mood. Oh, okay. So we shifted our stories, but one thing that we had in our favor, that's what I was going to say, was the newness of it. So that first year, we got the urge, we went and we made those phone calls, or we walked up to the person, the staffer, and we said, well, I'm here about House Bill 935, one of the Adam Walsh Act bills. We had about 10 of them. And they said, oh, yes, and they started to check me off as in favor. And I said, no, wait a minute. Actually, we're opposed to that bill. And there's this long pause. opposed. And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, and I started to explain why. And, they were okay. But it was like, oh, hey, wow. I mean, and, there's people here, and they're talking about not liking the bill. So we had some element of surprise that first year. And that was good. And it gave, I think, a lot of support. And so, again, the stories do have to be very carefully done. We had much better luck our next year, where we, in terms of using some stories, we had a Halloween bill that year. We did not have any Halloween restrictions on registrants, although people who were under supervision had some, restrictions. But they were trying to pass one that basically would have banned any Halloween activity. Okay, it was that broad. You couldn't have had a party in your own home if you were a registrant under the way the bill was worded. And so a lot of the people in my organization, which had grown a good bit in that past year, definitely showed up for that. We had registrants, we had people under supervision, we had family members, and they came and testified. And their stories were very specific. I'm a father. I have a child who is going to have issues. And we were able to control it a little better that way, and the bill died. And it didn't get out of committee, and I think to some extent because we brought forward the problems with the bill. So while it's very important as a more seasoned advocate to get that early start, especially if you're trying to introduce things, I want to make sure you understand that even if you're brand new and all you do is see that there's a bill out there that that needs to die, don't let that stop you. Go testify. But do focus on the issues in the bill. Focus on the Constitution, if you know what that is, how it's going to impact individuals in the community, how it's going to not be good for community safety. Focus on those issues. One final thing that I would share that I learned as I was as a beginning lobbyist, pictures are worth 1,000 words. We so often will show up there, and you probably have done your stats and your graphs, and so you've got some of those things. But a good picture is actually really, really powerful if you've got something you can do. We have no residency restrictions in Maryland. They tried to introduce them that same year they introduced the Adam Walsh Act, and it was Sex Offender Day at every bill, and there was a total of 84 that got introduced that year because there had been a really bad rape and murder of a child like in November the previous year. So everybody had some kind of a get tough on sex offender bill. And one of them was residency restrictions. So we'd gone all day, arguing this and fighting against that, and everybody was exhausted. The lawmakers going, oh, God, we've got more complaints. And they put that bill off until almost the very end. And there were lots of words. We were not alone in fighting some of these bills. The ACLU would show up, the Public Defenders Association was there, and they all got up and they talked about the importance of infrastructure and how the population density in the city of Baltimore, and and everybody's like, can I go home now? I'm so tired. And you could just see they were so bored, and it was having no effect on the lawmakers whatsoever. And I was sorely pissed. We'd had some really tough, rude people during the day, and I got pissed. So when it was my turn, I got up, and what I had been doing is prior, I Googled an area, went to Google Maps, and I looked up schools, and they were wanting to introduce a 1,500-foot residency restriction, and I looked up schools, and so all the little dots were there. I printed it out. I got my little compass, like we used in school with a little point on it, and I drew my little 1,500-foot circles around all of the school dots. And then wherever there wasn't a circle, I shaded it in, which was, of course, as you know, if you've ever seen, little tiny spots here and there. And I did that for two places. One was just outside of Baltimore, which is one of our major cities, of course, and then another small town in Maryland, just for comparison's sake. So I had these two pictures, just a 8.5 by 11, hand done, nothing fancy, and with the pictures. And I stood up at that point, and I said, okay, all that stuff that all those people were saying, we agree with that. I won't repeat it. And they loved that, of course, because, oh God, I've heard enough of that already. So I said, we agree with all that, but I've got some pictures for you. And I held up my first picture. And what I said was, okay, now you're wanting that 15-foot. I want you to see that this is a drawing. And I explained what I did. And I said, I want you to see these little tiny spots. And I told them where it was. Said, this is outside the city. This is not downtown Baltimore. This is just outside. And I described where it was. And I said, do you see these little tiny spots that are dark? That's the only place these people have to live. Where are they going to go? Where do you expect them to go? And then I showed them the same thing with the yellow and the other place. And I didn't have to fill in the answer because I could leave it open. What they heard was not, oh, those poor people, they're going to be homeless. That's what you and I were thinking probably, right? Oh my God, they're going to be homeless and living under a railway bridge. No, they were thinking, those people are going to come to my county. Okay, they're going to have to move there. We don't have the infrastructure. We can't take care of those people. We can't provide them the services that they, we don't have counseling services for, Baltimore has easily close to half the population of registrants in the state of Maryland. There would have been no place left in Maryland for them, in Baltimore, for them to live. Where are they going to go? All those nice affluent counties out around the area, all the rural districts, they have no infrastructure. So it's like, not in my backyard, you're not. And that's what killed the bill. I scared them to death. Exactly. Now, I did not come up with this idea on my own. I will confess, Larry Neely suggested to draw the line. But, our organization can take full credit for that because everybody else was totally asleep. But we got up there and we had that little map and we drew that little picture. And we pointed out to them. And when they later voted on it, that's what came up. The people from those other counties, the delegates, said, look, you guys have this bill and you guys have that bill. We're not going there. We're not going to pass that one. And so we were able to kill that. So a story can be well done and a picture can be well done, but you do have to be careful. So those are my learning experiences. Does anybody have any questions at this point? I've got a couple other things for the panel, but if anybody has questions about our learning, what we've learned, yes.
Okay, I testified this year in Texas, and this is my first experience. Okay, so I go, and I'm nervous. I get up there, they call my name, I get up there, and I start my talk, and all I see amongst the group of people is, this one's eating, these two are talking, these two are looking out somewhere else, this one's getting up to leave.
The inattention of the lawmakers and how does... Yeah.
That's what I saw.
Right.
We have reviewed a lot of, because when Mary Sue would send out, we testified at this, and I was showing my mom what I did, and she was like, well, they're not even paying attention to you.
Indeed. One thing I can tell you, and the other two, maybe you can join in. What we've been told, and what I encourage my folks when they go, is that you will frequently see people going in and out. You'll see them, busy on their things, or they just may not be there. Now, they might be sitting there glowering at you and being rude, but that what I've been told is don't treat that kind of inattention as rude. You would like them to be glued to you. But the fact is, they're multitasking. They've got, and very often they may have some other hearing that they've got to be introducing a bill for right then. Or they're, some constituent is sending them some urgent message, and they just have to, make those kind of judgment calls. And, so don't take it personally as the issue. And the other thing that I try to take comfort on, and I don't know if it's really true, is that they have staffers. And the whole time those hearings are going on, those staff are sitting back in those offices listening and taking notes. to some extent. Now, I don't know if they all do it. Carla's over here shaking her head no. But I have been in the rooms where I've seen them, to some extent to do it.
Arkansas does not have staff.
Oh, they don't have staff. Okay, so Arkansas has an issue where they don't have staff.
Neither does
okay.
Louisiana.
Neither does. Okay, in Maryland they have staff, so that's been helpful. So maybe you guys can also respond to that a little.
First, I would say, yes, Brenda, you're absolutely right. Don't take it personally. If I took everything that they did personally, I'd have shot myself by now.
Or somebody else.
Or somebody else. I have to, frequently they tell me, Gail, make sure you check the gun at the door. I think when you're testifying in front of a committee, you really need to be focused on what you need to say and not what they're doing. In Florida, they do have staff, and some of them actually wear an earbud, and their staff is feeding them information. Yeah, I just looked up that bill and that piece of research she just said, and they're getting information, or they are getting fed information in a text or whatever on a bill that's being heard in another committee, and they need to be prepared or whatever. But I will tell you, it is very rude sometimes when you're sitting there meeting with a legislator one-on-one, and they're not even looking at you. And my first experience with that was with the senator who we actually he's a great resource for me today. But when I first went and I met with him, I'm sitting there, I'm all prepared, and I was all nervous going in because this is a senior senator and he's got a lot of clout and, big good old boy. And I go in and I'm sitting down. He was very nice and he shook my hand and have a seat and let's talk. And about 30 seconds after I started opening my mouth, he's on his phone. And he's texting away and I'm talking and so I just stopped talking and I sat there. And then eventually he realized I wasn't talking. He looked up, he goes, no, I'm listening. I said, no, obviously you've got something really important going on. I have time. I says, what I have to say right now is going to be the same 5 minutes from now, so you go right ahead. And I just sat there. And he was like, no. And I said, no, you go right ahead. He put his phone down. And he looked at me and we finished our conversation. And, that was that. And I left and I get a call from one of his staffers and said, you made a point when you were meeting with Senator so-and-so and wanted me to follow up on that. And I'm looking at the packet of information that you sent. Are you still at the Capitol? I said, yes. They said, could you stop by and give me some additional information? Which I did. And now this is an individual that I can call on. And in fact, in this last legislative session, when it came right down to it, and this has been 4 years in the making, this relationship, when it came right down to it, and there was a really ugly bill, he just didn't hear it on his committee. It just died. And so that was a huge help to me when everybody says, oh, he's never going to do anything for you. Don't, what are you wasting your time? He's got his own agenda. No. It's about relationships. And, you need to be respectful of everyone you meet with, and if you want them to be respectful of you, then you conduct yourself, you take the high road every time. So the fact that I just stopped talking because I thought what I had to say was important, and I wanted him to listen. I can't do that when you're up at the podium going to testify and you've got 3 minutes. Yeah. What I do, however, is very frequently I have an expert with me when I'm going to testify. And if something comes up that I think would be better addressed by the expert that's with me, even if they haven't filled out a slip to testify, I will say, well, I have so-and-so with me who is actually an expert and would be a better person to answer or address that question, so I'm going to relinquish the rest of my time and for her to come up and speak or him to come up and speak, and they usually allow that. I think when you go to meet with legislators on a one-on-one, less is more. The fewer people that go in, the better, because when you have a whole bunch of people with you, the legislator feels compelled to hear from everybody. So everybody's going to say a snippet about something and nothing is going to get accomplished because there's not enough continuity of discussion. It's too fragmented. When you go in to testify about a bill, the more the merrier. And I think, if everybody gets 3 minutes to speak and you've got 10 people, you just spoke on this issue for 30 minutes. Yeah. So I'm not fortunate in Florida. I get nobody showing up because if they're a registrant, and they're on probation or anything. You can't travel out of county without permission, so they're not going to let you. Everybody else, it's too expensive. There aren't enough folks that actually live up there in that area. There are issues if you're on an ankle monitor coming in and you're setting off the alarm system, the security at the door. So they don't make it easy for us. But we don't even get family members because they don't want to go on camera, this and that. We don't get a whole lot of support at the legislature for people to come up and testify. And I ask all the time, you want to come with me? You tell me when, because I'm there all the time. Our legislative session this coming year will be January, February, into the middle of March. And I'm there all but maybe 3 weeks.
Okay. Did you have anything to add, Josh?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions for the audience. Wait, talk to you guys. How many of you are impacted by your legislature every day? How many?
Come on.
How many?
It should be everybody.
Yeah. How many of you have had bills that have personally affected your family? How many of you would do whatever it takes to change the laws? All right, here's the next question. How many of you have volunteered or contributed to your local legislator's campaign?
Yeah.
All right. Now, I asked that question as an individual, to be clear. If you want to change the laws, you have to build relationships. If you have a legislator that is willing to put their neck on the row to stop a bill, it is vitally important that come next election, you're the first one to volunteer for their campaign. And you're the first one to write a check, even if it's $5. Because it is a lot for a legislator to step out there and do that. And the investment is great. When you're talking about building relationships, the best times that I've ever had conversations with legislators was when I was walking to a house with them because they were blocking walks. I can't ever say it. Walking the block, knocking on doors, and you have absolute access to them. You can talk to them about all sorts of things. The other thing is, and I'll be brief on this point because this is so vitally important, but I forgot what it was. No, I'm just kidding. When I move into a new district, I call every single elected official. I say, hey, I'm new to the district. Do you have a newsletter? When can I come in and meet my legislator? I'd like to talk. Because I want to be plugged in. And I want to get their newsletters because sometimes they host events or they host conversations that they go to. And when they're outside of the Capitol, their guard is way down. When they're not working on bills, their guard is way down. And let's say you're a little bit more political than some and you attend, what do you call those things every year? Political conferences, political fundraisers. Fundraisers are another good one, but let's, town halls. Town halls are important. But the parties actually have, different parties have caucuses.
Caucuses?
Yeah. I found that is one of the best places. Their guard is down. They feel like they're in a safe place. They feel like they're in a place of like-minded people. And I have made more connections in places like that. Obviously, single party, but sometimes that's vitally important. If you can influence and shape one legislator, for example, it was one legislator that for 35 years tried to change the death penalty in Nebraska. He finally got it done. It was 35 years. But you never know who that legislator could become. You never know what they could do, because someday they could be Speaker of the House. And so building a relationship, again, hit it like a dead horse, but that is so important.
It is very, very important, definitely. Yes?
So, for most of my life, I was not, even get to that, but I don't know what to talk about with the legislator.
What to talk about?
Do I talk to him about
okay.
dangers? Do I talk
Very,
to him about,
what to talk about?
To him about being on the registry.
Yeah.
Then I'm way outside of my element.
Exactly. Well, I think Josh's comment at first was, if you meet them at some other time other than when a bill's being heard, you get to know them as a person. You sign up to help with their campaign or, whatever seems appropriate for you.
If you're in the same party, you have a lot of the same talking points.
So you talk about other things. If it's, a little more focused on, bills are coming up, that kind of thing, you're meeting them at the Capitol, what I tell my folks to do is, make an appointment with your elected official. You are their constituent. You have power at that point. You have your vote. Okay, and at least in my in my state, once you're off supervision, you have a vote again. So, and many states have gone to that. I know it's not true everywhere. So you've got that. And I say, if you don't have a specific bill that you're wanting to push or push away, you can go there and just focus on maybe a short story about the registry and how it's impacting you or others and public safety. But again, focus on it being you being human. That it's not monsters, that there's, how many people are there's the recidivism, and, just whatever seems appropriate for them. And you always conclude with an ask. You heard Josh mention the word ask. You want to always take advantage of any opportunity you have to ask them something. And, they want to, well, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? And if you don't have a bill, then you say, remember me when there is a bill. I'm a person. I'm trying to move on with my life. Whatever. Or I'm a loved one of somebody, and it's impacting me and my family. Whatever that is. Just keep me in mind, and and I'll be watching your vote. I'll be watching to see how you vote on that, and contact me if you've got questions. Hey, I'm an expert. I know more about it than you do, right? So.
I guess before you even get to that point, when you are making that connection and you're not coming up and saying, I'm your constituent and I'm on the registry, but you're trying to find some common ground, and let's say it's not someone who's in your party.
So common ground.
Opposite, that you don't share the same religion, you don't share,
so what's the connection?
They are the opposite. He was one of the sponsors on 1872. So how am I supposed to go and say, vote against 1872?
Oh, because they can't do that. Right?
Okay. Well, it's like anything else. When you build a relationship, or you're at a cocktail party, or you're in, anywhere, and you're meeting new people, you always find something to talk about. It could be the weather. It could be a sporting game. It could be really anything. I mean, for me, I have this thing about shoes. And everybody at the Capitol, they kind of know me. And if they can't remember my name, I'm the little blonde lady from down south. Or I'm the one, oh, you're the one with the blue suede shoes you wore into the, they'll say something to me very often, just in passing, or gee, love your necklace or something, and it's an icebreaker. I've actually, found that I don't necessarily have to have something in common with somebody. And if you say they happen to be sponsoring a bill of any kind, whether it has to do with your issue or not, whether you are for or against, it's a great thing to say, oh, so nice to meet you, Representative so-and-so. By the way, I understand that you're the co-sponsor on such and such a bill. I wanted to talk to you about that. Can you tell me, why did you get involved with that bill? You're now having a conversation. It doesn't really matter. And one of the things that, I started using this year, when I'm asked very often how many members I have, my response is always, well, I represent the 63,000 plus registered citizens in the state of Florida. And when they ask me again, how many members do you have? I say, well, I represent the 63,000 plus registered citizens in the state of Florida. And by the way, there are calculations that are used all the time for sphere of influence, and whether you vote or you don't vote, and I don't remember where I got it from, but I've had 2 LAs confirm, on a very minimal basis, each person, whether you vote or not, minimally influences 20 votes. So in Florida, we actually have influence over 1.3 million votes. So do you want to talk to me? Do you want to know what I think about certain issues? Because we've got 1.3 million constituents in this state that vote. Hello. There are 800,000 registrants in the United States. That means that's 16 million votes that we influence. And why are we not using these numbers? We need to recognize the power in our sphere of influence. And when we speak to a legislator about any issue, we need to do it with confidence that there are 16 million other like-minded people being affected by this in our country. And one of the things I think that needs to be part of anybody's legislative purview going forward is if there is someone throwing their hat in the ring to run for president in the next election, why is this not a concern of theirs? Because it affects 16 million votes in this country and 800,000 individuals and their children and their families that are being denied services. And how do you feel about this? And what are you going to do about the immense human rights violations that are being inflicted on these people and that they are being... Why is this not part of the conversation? We have the power to do this.
That's very, very true. Yeah. And you're right. It wasn't the numbers. The other part you were mentioning about representing, that's a really key point. That I had the advantage that pretty quickly on we created a little organization. So I'd go in and I'd say, I'm a member of, or I'm the executive director of, and I would say my organization name. That always just right there, even if I didn't say how many. But even if you don't have that, it's true. You can go in and you can say, I'm an example of, the X number of people in your state that are registrants or the family members, so you can say, I represent them. Absolutely. Josh, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
I think the most important thing to add is we no longer have the opportunity not to be political. So, unfortunately, I know politics has become this enigma that most Americans dislike. But because politics so affects our lives almost to the day and hour, we no longer have the right not to be involved. It doesn't matter, what your political thinking is, but it is just so vitally important that you not let the system intimidate you or scare you, because it is right. We do have a large amount of people. That being said, I think one of the most important things to do is to also engage communities of faith. I have seen this legislative session, the effect and authority and power that it has to have a minister present and speak. Because you know what? A lot of these legislators go to churches. And so in some counties that we've done some organizing, we've actually specifically targeted churches that they attend. And so the first thing I do about a legislator is I want to know who his friends are. So you look up their political contributions, and it's really simple and easy. And these are things in the future that I'm willing and prepared to help teach people and advocate. And so if you have questions on what you need to do, but I also want to give a shout out, because one person can kill a bill. And there is one person in this room that killed an absolutely terrible bill, and it was a bill that would have affected him and his. And I won't call his name out, but I will tell you, he went every day. He called. He watched every bill, and he worked and he testified for the first time, and he spoke out. And I've never seen someone who worked so hard to protect himself and his family. He killed a bill, and a large portion of that was that people had built a relationship, and toward the end of a session, there was actually some partisanship stuff that was going on, and the bill that he was working so hard to do was actually killed because it was an opposite member party bill. And so, working on this stuff is really effective, and it really works. So you may not win the first time you go. You may not even win the second time you go. But as long as you're going and you're trying, eventually something's got to give, to quote somebody. I don't remember who. Yeah. But
our time's about up. We can maybe take one more question, and then we need to start clearing out. Yes, in the back? How do you know when to show up? Yeah, that really can be challenging, and every state's a little different too in how it's done. In Maryland, they do schedule the bills, but not that far in advance. So, I mean, in my case, I just kind of plan that during legislative session, there's going to be days when I'm going to have to take off. But I can do that in my particular job. And sometimes you get, at the beginning of session, you might get, a couple of weeks' notice that it's been, a bill's been scheduled on a certain day. Getting toward the end, you're about watching it by the day, Yeah.
Same day, something
sometimes
wasn't
it's
gonna be heard,
yeah, it wasn't going to be
changed to it, and it came out of committee, and
Right.
now it's going up, and
Yeah.
you're going to,
Yeah,
and
that's true with NC. Now that works in Gail's situation. See, it shifts. And so how do you know? And it's very difficult. What we'd worked out there was kind of a team effort. At least when we had lots of bills, we try to have somebody. And I know in New Mexico they do that. They kind of basically have door watchers, because literally a sign would go up on the door. And then they would have people that kind of signed up to come and show up if a sign goes up on the door that a bill's being heard. Because in New Mexico, you don't know. And you could go there and sit there all day, and then they'll say, oh, well, time's up. We're scheduled for next week. You've wasted a day.
I just
yeah. Right. So it is a challenge, and you got, it's hard to work around that. I mean, they try to make it to where a citizen can participate, but you have to sacrifice. It's very difficult. You don't want to hear from Gail. Okay.
If they know you and you call, if they know you, that really counts too. It really does.
Yeah, the people who have the relationship, sometimes they'll actually call you to say something's coming up. But you have to have built that relationship, and they know you're watching a bill. And then they'll say, oh, such and such a bill is coming up. You can watch on your legislative website and get some sense of it. But again, it depends on the bill.
Do you all have something called lobby tools? Do you know what that is?
Lobby tools. In Maryland, we have, we can, on our legislative website, we can actually go online, hunt for bills. If we find a bill that we want to track, we can save it, and it'll let us know what the status is on a regular basis.
We have a service. What do we pay, $300 a month?
Ooh.
We pay $300 a month, and we have this tool. It's called Lobby Tools, and all the legislators get it. All the LAs get it. That's how I found out about it. Mm-hmm. All the lobbyists get it, and you program it based on search terms and whatever. So every time a new bill is filed, every time a bill is going to be heard, every time an amendment is done to a bill, every time there's an article about the bill, even legislation that's being looked at in other states that are being posted. I get a text, I get an email on my phone constantly all year long, even when a legislator puts a bill, puts something in for a bill. Once it becomes a bill and it gets a number, I'll know about it.
Flag about it. That's
so
wonderful.
we can field that, but it costs us $300 a month, and we have single subscriber. Most lobbyist firms use this, and they have, they're paying upwards of, $2,000-$3,000 a month for this. So we have like the minimal level of service, just so that because I can't keep up with it all. But it's a great tool, and if you do have on your legislative website, like you were talking about, a way to go in and track bills, and you can do this federally also. And I have things flagged, govtrack.us or something, where I can track bills and see what's going on all over the country just by putting in certain keywords. So I have anything to do with sex offenders, residency restrictions, stuff like that.
Great. We are going to have to call it quits. If anybody has a few more questions, they could come up and talk to us. Remember that we do need to try to catch that shuttle. The first one's in about 10 minutes, and then there'll be 2 more after that, so try to clear out. Thank you all, and we'll see you soon.